So I gave a high school graduation speech a few years ago, and I was given some simple advice that's really stuck with me about effective public speaking. The principal called me up and she said, "Just don't be too depressing." And I guess if you talk mostly about politics these days, that's fair, I get it. I'm not here today to tell you about one new idea about what's wrong in the world. I'm here to share with you one idea I have about how we can fix it. About not just an idea, it's an opportunity that we have. There's an extraordinary generation growing up in the United States right now, and we're facing some extraordinary public problems. We have an opportunity right now to engage that generation in helping us solve them. And if we don't take that opportunity, I think we risk everything. The question in front of us is, how do we do it? What happens? So, I've been developing leaders now for about 15 years. Most of that time with the Oregon Bus Project, where we're developing leaders for politics and democracy. It's very sexy. And after this time, I don't have a definition for you of what it is to be a leader, but I do know that there are two kinds of leaders. There are those leaders who know that they are leaders, and there are those that don't yet, who have not yet felt that they had the permission or the tools or the reason to lead. Let me ask you, what was the moment in your life that someone gave you permission to lead? Who gave you the right to lead? What was the moment for you that called forth the particular clarity or outrage or joy at the center of your leadership? I'm going to share one of those moments of mine. When I was a little kid, I loved riding horses. Nothing fancy, I just had a shaggy pony I liked to gallop around the mountain behind my house. And so I was a little put out when my riding instructor, Fran, called me over and said, "You're never going to be any good at this if you don't fall off the horse." Whoa, 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 whoa. I thought the whole point was to stay on the horse. And here's the thing. When we hear the lesson about falling off a horse, so often the emphasis is on getting back on. But that wasn't the lesson Fran was trying to teach me. Fran's lesson was about the courage required when you're terrified and all you can do is hold on and try not to fall off. The courage it takes to get comfortable enough that you could fall off. This isn't a lesson about how to ride a horse. This is a lesson about how to change the world. We have a generation that's grown up during a time of incredible risk, and so many of us right now are just holding on. But I need to know, what's it going to take to give us the courage to become the leaders who can solve these problems? This circle here, this represents an amazing generation, the baby boomers. You all know and love the baby boomers. 76 million people, giant generation, cultural revolution and all that jazz. They changed this country. But the extraordinary generation I want to talk about is their children and their grandchildren. An even bigger generation. This is the biggest generation in US history. It doesn't look much bigger up here, but it's a lot bigger. 80 to 90 million people. And more than just being a giant generation ready to leave a giant legacy, they are extraordinary for many reasons. It's the most racially diverse generation in US history. In this community, in our city, half of the people under the age of 18 are living in people of color. By 2016, 1/3 of all the voters in this country will be under the age of 35. And this is a generation that's ahead of the curve on many issues of social concern. This generation could leave an amazing legacy. But this generation is also facing some daunting challenges. And ask them, they feel singularly responsible for fixing these things. From the melting polar ice caps to rampant climate chaos, from the mass consolidation of 60 US banks to 6, or is it 5 now? Massive unemployment is projected to tag this generation financially for the rest of their lives. You know, a couple in their early 20s asked me recently if they would ever be able to buy a home to raise their family in, as their parents had. And this generation is projected to have shorter lifespans than those that came before. This generation is going to require extraordinary leadership. And I think that for this generation, for this to work, leadership's going to have to look a little different than it has in the past. Now, even at a time when big organizations are getting bigger, one of the things that's changing that gives me hope is the rising power of the small and local. New voices are emerging that are empowered by new technology and networks that are bringing them forward in a way that's making huge differences. From the power of thousands of young people in this last year sleeping in tents at night, to call the national attention to issues of economic disparities and campaign finance reforms, and from the power of a single tweet matched by the sacrifices of thousands of young people to change the destiny of a nation. This is one thing that's changing. But the other thing that's changing is how we think about leadership itself. The new extraordinary companies and communities are built on collaborative leadership, not tiers of leaders and followers, where the person at the top is the person who identifies what the problem is, how to fix it, and when it's solved. This new model of collaborative leadership is already being adopted by major companies all over the world. Take, for instance, the well-known story of Toyota and GM. In a Toyota factory on the floor, any person on the assembly line can stop the conveyor and say, hey, there's a problem over here, you gotta come fix it. And the boss comes over and they talk about what the problem is and they come up with a solution. Historically, that wasn't the case at GM. Historically at GM, it was all but forbidden in the name of efficiency to stop that assembly line. And what that meant was that automobiles were rolling off the assembly line already broken. And they were piled up in parking lots waiting for some guy to go out and figure out what was wrong with them and how to fix them. This was incredibly inefficient. And so what GM did was they adopted the Toyota model. And it meant that they needed to retrain all of their assembly staff, train them in a culture of collaborative leadership. This isn't a lesson about how to build cars. I don't know how to build cars. Mark Frohnmeyer does. This is a lesson about how to build leaders. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the bus project. Really, for the last 10 years, the bus has been an experiment in radical leadership development, in shared decision-making. We're an organization run by people who are 19, 20, 24 years old. And this experiment is ongoing. I don't know the outcomes of this experiment. I know that in the last 10 years, some of our great people have gone on to become elected leaders and be in positions of public interest decision-making. But we're still learning the answer to these big questions. But what I wanted to do today, is the first time I've ever done this with any audience, is share with you a little bit of what I think we're learning about how this works. I've got 6 simple points. First, take everyone. So we run a program, it's called Politicor. We bring 25 college seniors and recent graduates from all over the country. We bring them to Oregon for the summer, and we train them to be effective organizers. It's really fun. And when we started the program, we asked them for some advice. We wanted to know, what is this leadership development thing, and how do you do it? And one great advisor spent a lot of time with us. He said, here's the deal. There's no such thing as leadership development. You can't make them, he said. You just have to find them. It's cool. So I went out to find myself some leaders. And I started doing my very first round of telephone interviews for the program. And I found really quickly that the kids at Harvard and Swarthmore, they're way better at applying for the job. They're so poised and confident and funny. They ask great questions. They laughed at my jokes. My jokes aren't that funny. And the thing is, this stuff matters. I was like, fantastic. I'm going to fill my program with these kids, and in 10 or 20 years, we'll have our own caucus in Congress. But here's the hitch. The next generation isn't a majority Harvard graduates with charming stories to tell about being Eagle Scouts. Not to knock the Harvard graduates, some of my good friends went to Harvard. The problem is, for this experiment to work, for this experiment in extraordinary leadership, to build a vast public interest network to solve the problems that we're facing, a bunch of Ivy League class presidents isn't going to cut it. We have to believe that that advisor, that guy, that he was wrong. We have to believe that if you give someone the motivation, or if they have it in them already, if you train them, and if you give them the right support and encouragement, that anybody can become an effective public interest leader. So we take everyone. Second, we give them everything. After our first year of running the program, one of the graduates came up to me, and this is the problem with the next generation, no respect for authority. She said, "You're doing this all wrong." And I said, "Okay, tell me how." And she said, "You know, I canvassed for 6 hours a day this summer, and that's fine. I believe in the work, but I don't see how that turns me into a leader. To be a leader, I need to be able to, lead." And I thought, oh yeah, that's right. There's that whole risk-taking and ownership and commitment thing that I believe in. Well, how would I do that? So after her advice, we redesigned the program. And what we do is super uncomfortable for us as an organization. These 25 leaders come from all over the country, and after 1 week of training, we hand them the reins. And we say, okay, here's a real political campaign that matters this year. You run it. And what that does is fairly simply gives them an opportunity to do 4 things that you've got to do to be a leader. They solve problems, develop good judgment. They challenge their own conventional thinking by being in these sort of real-world situations. They clarify their values by having to answer non-rhetorical questions about priority and purpose. These things come up. And they have to develop habitual leadership, not just the kind of thing that you can read in a book that you buy at the airport, but the kind of thing that gets tested when you're in a high-stress situation or when the stakes are high and the outcomes are real. So to make them leaders, we give them everything. Next, we try to get out of the way. Right when I graduated from college, I spent a year working with gang-affected and incarcerated kids in a wilderness program out in the desert. And my coworker, my mentor really, was this guy named Paul. He was this mountain man. You would have loved him. He had this crazy beard and carabiners sticking off of him everywhere. And he was a great teacher. And he could turn any difficult situation with that group into a learning moment. But here's the thing. Paul seemed kind of lazy. He had this newspaper, he'd walk around with it, and whenever the kids started working on something, trying to figure something out, like, how do I start a fire with this bow drill? Or, what is this geological structure? I'd find Paul over in the corner reading his newspaper. I was like, what's the deal, Paul? I don't get it. So I confronted him on this. I said, what are you doing? And he said, teaching. I was like, it looks to me like you're reading a newspaper. And he said, look, I'm teaching them that I trust them. These kids are about to leave jail for the first time in a few years for some of them, and they're about to be grown-ups, and they need to know that they can figure it out on their own. Yeah, this next generation that's grown up during a time of a lot of risk has also been very well taken care of. And yes, we need to give them guidance and training and encouragement. We also need to get out of the way. And what it takes to create a leader is the room created by another leader, not leading. Fourth, we need to create an extraordinary experience. You know, Wendy Kopp, who created Teach for America, she was onto something. If you make it hard to get in, it seems more attractive to be there. And if you make the program itself hard, it creates a meaningful, lifelong experience. We've lost many of the rites of passage that used to mark the difference between being a child and being a grown-up. And a rite of passage has 3 phases. The first is identifying something as special, the few, the proud, the toughest job you'll ever love. And then there's a period of uncertainty and difficulty and tests. Tests in some cultures look like going out on a giant hunting expedition or having to sit in a dark cave for a few weeks. These are tests of what it is to be a human, what it is to become a man or a woman, an adult, what it is to be a member of society. And at the end of a rite of passage, you welcome somebody back into society. And with Politicor, we have a big graduation to thank our fellows for the gift that they've given themselves and us of becoming better young leaders. Now, the last 2 are very simple. Create an uncommon connection. Friendship is at the heart of lifelong leadership. We ask the fellows to think critically about how to create a community of achievement, courage, and accountability so that they can be the leaders that they want to be for the rest of their lives. And finally, we know that we have to be a part of that community, and we have to help them connect the dots. It's not obvious how to create a public interest life that matters. And it's our responsibility when we're done with our nice little program to say, and here's the next step, and the one after that. So that's our experiment. We'll see how it turns out. But here's what I think. We have an opportunity right now to solve this problem. And if we don't, we risk everything. The things that I think that we've learned are that we have to take everyone and engage them in solving this problem, and we have to give them all of the problem. And then we have to get out of the way so that we can solve it together in a collaborative way. We have to create an extraordinary experience, create uncommon connections and friendships to do this work, and connect the dots into the future. Thank you.